The media has been lying to you. They've been saying that there's a seller shortage, but right now we're actually experiencing a buyer shortage. I'm going to show you all the data you need to understand what's happening in the housing market, specifically in the Sun Belt, that is pushing it all the way back to pre-2019 levels, and prices are to come. So let's dig into what's actually happening. But home buyer demand right now remains at record lows. You can see it's grinding along the bottom, almost as bad as it was during the great financial crisis. So what we had in 2021 was actually the inventory shortage for sure in the Sun Belt areas, because we had a massive spike of demand from the Northeast and the West, from people looking to avoid the situations there politically and come to the Sun Belt areas. But once that reverted back and markets reopened, the buyers that came to the area who settled, actually a lot of them are starting to leave the Sun Belt and go back home. And so we're starting to see a lot of demand go back up north, and we're starting to see supply come on here in the south, where we now have an affordability crisis because all those wealthy people moving here basically pushed prices up at the same time where the locals are now priced out. That's why we're experiencing home buyer demand near record lows in May 2026. This is especially true in the Sun Belt areas, but it's across the board because mortgage interest rates went all the way from 3% now up to 6.5%, and it's really stalling things out. Obviously, when the home buyer demand slows, that's when the pending home sales also slow. You can see home sales hit the lowest level since 2009, lowest monthly sales since 2009 right here, 4.09 million versus February 2009, 3.97 million. So this is what we're seeing on the ground, okay? Active inventory is up. Pending sales are down significantly, up to, even in our market, 31% decline from last year. Price cuts are accelerating every single month, every single week. Sellers are cutting their prices of their homes. The homes are sitting longer. The builders are providing insane incentives. I'm going to show you a crazy chart at the end of this presentation on this. Mortgage apps remain weak. So, and the ultimate story again is that affordability is near record lows. So we are already worse than 2008 when you look at the number of home sales, and we have larger populations now than what we had then, and we have a ton more real estate now than what we had then. And so this story is absolutely insane, and we think that this is going to get worse before it gets better. Prices have to come down to loosen up the affordability to bring buyers back into the market. So while you've been told by the media that we have a housing shortage, it's not true. We actually have it the opposite way. We have a buyer shortage. Look at this. Sellers are 1.99 million. This comes from Redfin's data that comes out. The gap between sellers and buyers are at 1.36. Buyers are actually going down. Sellers are carving off because sellers are getting frustrated when they can't sell their house. They rage quit, they yank the house off of the market, and they turn it into a rental. We call those accidental landlords. I'll be showing you information on how fast that is accelerating right now. But then, of course, when you have so many rentals come on the market at the same time, you have rents drop. And when rents drop, it basically creates a comparison narrative for the buyers to say, hey, could I rent this similar product than what I could buy it for and save the extra $1,500 a month and maybe invest it in equities or put it somewhere else? So buyers are getting control of the marketplace after years of not having any control. This is a great thing, but it definitely does not play into the narrative of a shortage of housing in any regards, especially here in the Sun Belt areas. So the prices just got insane. Obviously, you saw here after the great financial crisis, we just had the 2012 low, which basically took about 5 years from the top to the bottom. And we expect that there will be, it's going to take time. Like these bubbles don't just crack overnight. Real estate's in a liquid asset class. So it's going to take years for this to play out. We could really see a slow declining market all the way to 2030 as wages have to stay, keep up in order to be able to afford these prices. And that's if mortgage interest rates stay range bound right now. But buying a house at this point in the market cycle is often 50% more expensive than renting a similar home. And this is really where the buyers have to ask themselves, especially at this point in the market cycle, should I just rent and wait this out? Because the math no longer makes sense of owning, where you also have to deal with, it's not a fixed payment, guys. You have to deal with insurance costs increasing, taxes increasing. You obviously have maintenance repair costs, which can usually be 1 to 2% of the house value every single year, depending on the age of the property. But this is not one of those things where It's just like a small expense, and buyers are rushing out there to go buy a house for $1,500 more for a similar house than what they could rent it for. And because of this, we're seeing all the demand drop, which I just showed you. And of course, the next phase after demand drops, listings start to stack up. They're not stacking up as faster because we have the rage quitting situation happen. But now we're starting to see the median listing price percentage change. This report comes from Realtor.com. It shows that the median list price of existing U.S. homes dropped 2.4% year over year, the largest annual decline since at least 2017 on a square foot basis, which I think is a better calculation. Actually, prices are down 2.5%. So this is an important narrative. You can actually see when the Fed raised rates in 2022, October 2022, that was the peak. They started raising in March. That you just see the demand drop, and then you also see the prices drop because we live in a payment economy. So if the consumer can't afford the payment, then the transactions stall and things just start to slow down, and then obviously the prices start to drop. So that's the next phase of the housing market. And of course, this isn't going to play out the same way everywhere at the same time. We can see here in Florida and Texas, and the areas that were basically overextended from the 2020 to 2021 time period that saw these demand shocks are now the ones that are dominating the list for the steepest home price index declines. And part of the issue that we're seeing right now are these migration patterns that are changing. So people who used to move from the Northeast or out west and come to Jacksonville or Florida or Texas, they're now saying, you know what, I'm going out to the Midwest. I'm going to see where I can actually afford to live and where the numbers make sense from a ratio perspective, because these markets simply just got overinflated and over speculated. And of course, when you see the migration patterns change, you start to see corrections in the housing prices, because especially areas like Florida, you have to have population come in. Otherwise, the population literally starts dying off. And so you have to have the migration. So I don't understand when the politicians say, hey, we're full, don't move to Florida anymore. The whole state of Florida is reliant upon people moving here, especially wealthy. Typically boomers moving here. We need a young middle class here as well. So we want to attract young people with families who settle down here to start building up our middle class, which is much thinner than the rest of America. And so this is one of those stories where the year over year change in single family home prices are basically falling across 27 of the 28 metros here in Florida, according to Resi Club. And this is a really important fact because it's everywhere now. Okay. So a lot of people said, oh, I'm not seeing it in my market. It is pretty much in every market here in the Sun Belt. We're starting to see weakening demand. And of course, because the affordability makes no sense, the median age of all home buyers is now up to 60 years old. The first-time home buyers are at 40 years old. So people are delaying their purchases, and the people who are able to purchase are much further along in their life, often already owned a home, cashed out their equity, and then are buying a new home. And that's what we're seeing across the board. Now, the home value to income ratio is just still, even after the decline that we've had since 2022, late 2022, we're just so far away from the median home value to income ratio. And this is where the younger folks, the younger generation say, hey, you were able to go buy a house on three times your income. We're have to buy it 4 times our income, and our insurance and taxes and everything is much more expensive than they had back in the day. So this is a really interesting chart to show just how things have changed over time. And obviously in the 2006 bubble, 2007, we were at those levels, and we're still at those levels today. And that's how dangerous this market is from an affordability standpoint. One other factor to mention is that the cost of living, even outside of shelter costs, which is now up to 30+% of people's income, is, this comes from Mike Green, shows that using conservative national average data, the 136,000 is the new poverty of level of income for a lot of markets across America. You can see the childcare costs. If you have kids, it's expensive. I have 3. I know what they're talking about. Food, transportation, healthcare costs are insane. Saw another chart come out today, say they're up another 7%. Other essentials and your required net income. And of course, you have, all the taxes that come along with it. So obviously the American dream is really challenging. Now, a lot of people say, hey, over $100,000 is a great level of income. And there's no question that that is true. But if you're if you're building a family and trying to build a life, it is very, very challenging. There's not a lot of money left over to save up for a down payment. And because these prices are falling, and because the buyers are backing off and we have a buyer shortage now, sellers are giving up. They're saying, hey, look, if I can't get the equity out of my house, I'm not going to be able to buy my next house. So they just take their house off the market and either stay put because they have their low mortgage rate. But the same reason why buyers can't buy is the same reason sellers can't sell. It's just unaffordable and they just can't make the math make sense. So this is why we're seeing a record number of delistings of homes. Again, I call this the rage quitting phenomenon, where people get frustrated with their listings and they take them off of the market. They blame the real estate agents often, but the reality is the prices no longer make sense. If you're a seller and you need help on selling your house, reach out to me. You can reach out to me directly. I can get you in touch with a top agent. The difference between a top agent and a bottom agent could not be more different. You want a top 5% agent in your marketplace who will be able to guide you through the transaction. If you're a buyer looking, it's especially true as well. You need to have somebody who can negotiate on your behalf. Reach out to me. I'll put my contact information below. I'm more than happy to connect you with some of the top people around the country. But what we're seeing right now is accidental landlords are spiking. So this is when the seller delists their house and then they turn it into a rental property. And now the sellers are just giving up. So you can see America's accidental landlords are up to 6.9% of active U.S. rentals. And it's actually increasing across the board. You can see obviously Florida, Texas, the areas that had the most boom time periods are now the ones who are changing them into rentals. But now the rentals, because there's a flock of them coming onto the market and they're competing with build to rent product, especially here in Florida, and multifamily, luxury multifamily prices continue to move down on the rent amounts. And we're even seeing situations where you can negotiate 3 months free rent and to be able to get into an apartment. And so we think that rents will continue to decline moving forward into the end of the year here in Florida and obviously areas of the Sun Belt. And this is why this all shows why we're at one of the lowest levels of turnover ratios in decades. And this is why we're grinding along the bottom for the number of closed existing home sales, is because people are locked into their homes. They can't rent it. They can't go buy another house because they have to trade in the rate. And that basically just creates this massively low turnover ratio where people are just staying put in their house. We're actually seeing people stay in their house. They used to stay 8 to 10 years. Now it's more like 10 to 12 years, and it's changing everything. 75% of U.S. homes are now unaffordable. To Dave Ramsey calls this the most unrealistic real estate market in 100 years. So we're starting to see some really big players that advocate for home ownership start to come out and say, hey, the math is really breaking down here. And I'm happy to see this because we keep saying that there's a shortage when we really have an affordability crisis and everything. How can you have a shortage when you have inventory rising and prices dropping? That doesn't even make sense. And we have 15 million homes that are vacant right now. It's about 10% of the homes out there in the United States for sale are vacant in a lot of ways, and they're just stacking up across the board. So look, the consumer sentiment is obviously near record lows. This is how the Americans are feeling. We see this through the University of Michigan index, and the sentiment is just dropping every single month. People do not feel good about the economy. They're loaded up with debt. And this is where we're talking about the credit cards are skyrocketing. This is the percent of credit cards with 90 days plus delinquent. And we think that this is already near the great financial crisis, and we haven't even experienced the job loss yet. So I think it's time for you to buckle up. Look, you have to ask yourself, how long can this continue to last? Who is the next buyer of my home? What are they going to be purchasing it with? How can they make that happen? And well, one of the ways that they're still making it happen, and this is a crazy study that just came out by Veterans United, is that 6 in 10 parents are helping their kids buy homes. We see this all the time. It's usually the top wealthiest parents out there in the marketplace. They gift their down payments to the kids so that they're able to actually have a down payment to afford and purchase a home. Sometimes they even help them with their mortgage payments. But this is a really strange phenomenon. Usually the young generation is supposed to earn money to help their parents retire. Well, the parents are actually saved up all their money and now they're helping their kids buy their first house because it's so unaffordable. So it's a really interesting and crazy market right now in the real estate world. And here's the chart I talked to at the beginning of the video, which is that Lennar prices are down 25% in 4 years. Look at this. It was at the peak in 2022 of 491,000. Now we're all the way down to 371,000. This is according to SEC filings from Lennar. It's the net selling price of incentives. So that does include all of the rate buy downs that they have for people. But you can see Lennar is selling homes even cheaper than they did pre-2020. 2019, it was still $50,000 higher. So those people who bought these houses in these new communities, even back in 2019 could be underwater if there's more Lennar properties being bought all around them. And they usually do. They usually go on phase two, phase three, phase four, etc. down the line. So, if you're buying new construction, you need a top agent to be able to negotiate for you. It's going to be at that point pretty soon here in Sunbelt markets where you're going to be able to do really great negotiations with these builders, especially going into the end of the year as they have to cut prices to get their numbers up before their end of year earnings. So if you need a top agent to help you with new construction, reach out to me. I'm going to put my contact information in the description. More than happy to help. And this is where we talk about you can negotiate like crazy. New construction continues to stack. This is why, again, we have no housing shortage. New houses for sale by stage of construction not started. It has just skyrocketed. And we're already worse than great financial crisis for new construction, just the backlog that's not started, just stacking up right there. And this is what's been driving the market the entire time, right? Prices have skyrocketed over the last 40 years because of falling mortgage interest rates. Mortgage interest rates account to up to 80% of price appreciation over the last 40 years, according to various studies. There's a Goldman study that said 50% to 60%. There's another one by John Wake, who's a great housing analyst, that say up to 80%. But the reality is we live in a payment economy. The consumer maxes out their payments. They are maxed out right now. They're maxed out on their credit cards. They're maxed out on their car loans. They're maxed out on their student loans. They're maxed out on their mortgage payment. And because rates are going up and not down for the last few years, and we're up from 3% to 6.5%, that is the major problem. So you have to ask yourself, what happens to home prices when the consumer's loaded up with debt and interest rates change direction? So look, I'd love to hear from you. What do you think will happen next? My guess is that the prices come down. Okay, I've done the investment banking, models for investment properties, and I can see prices coming down 31 to 42% over the next 5 to 10 years. I think it's going to be a slow grind because I think there's going to be a lot of resistance to those prices coming down from the government. And I want to understand what you think is going to happen next. So comment below what you think and what are you seeing on the ground in your market. And if you're in the Northeast, you have a totally different story than what we're experiencing here. We're actually seeing price appreciation in the Northeast because they did not have the speculation. They did not have the wild building that they have, but they have a bunch of other issues like aging inventory, and their young people are moving out to go find affordability. So I'd love to hear from you what you're seeing on the ground. This market is completely changing right before our eyes. Again, we saw pending home sales drop between 23 and 30% this month versus the same month last year, and we're in the middle of busy season. So things are changing fast. It's important to pay attention. I thank you for watching this channel. I'm going to give you an update every single week this summer, and then we'll be doing 2 videos a week starting at the end of the summer. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next week.